Dear friends and colleagues, I am sincerely glad to open an international course of lectures, which is quite relevant given to the current situation in modern education and connection with the spread of such situation of pandemic of COVID. So we tried to gather at several professors, teachers from the different institutions of Europe, and this such institutions as Taras Shevchenko National University of Kyiv from Ukraine, University of Ferrara, Italy, Polytechnic Institute of Tomar, Geosciences Center, University of Coimbra, Portugal, University of Bern, Switzerland, National Museum of Natural History, France, University of Rzeszów, Poland, Adama Mickiewicza University in Poznań, Poland. And we started the course with topic Nature and Society in Prehistoric Europe. Due to this topic, we will describe different themes about the relationship between human and environment from the early beginning, from the start of the population of Europe till the Neolithic time. And today it is with great pleasure I present to your attention a lecture by Marta Arzarello, professor of University of Ferrara, Italy, professor in Prehistory and Protohistory, Department of Humanities, with such quite interesting topic about the earliest population in Europe continent. Marta, please.
Thank you very much, Pablo, and thank you to have organized this project. But it's really, as I was saying before, a good idea for this moment. Hello to everybody, and thank you to be here online. I'm very happy, as I was saying, to participate in this project, and we will briefly talk about the first European populi, taking into consideration the Homo evolution, the migration routes, and the behavior of those first European. I will try to develop this topic quite fast in order to have time at the end for questions, but if something that I say is not clear, of course, you can stop me in every moment. So, talking about first European population, of course, we are talking about a quite late period of human evolution, because as everybody knows, the first lithic complexes are attested in Africa about 3.3 million years ago. It means that the Homo just stayed more or less more than 1 million years in Africa before Asia and Europe. This is the topic that it's developed in mostly in recent time, because if we think about the scenario something like 30 years ago, most part of the researcher was convinced that any kind of European population was possible before 700,000 years ago. And it's thanks to the site of Isanera Pineta and Le Vallonnet in France that researchers start to discuss about the oldest stage of European population. So we will talk about Europe, but we have not to forget that the evidence of European population are older in Asia, as in the Java Island in Indonesia, we have the presence of Homo around 2 million years ago. The first European population, of course, it's a long history, but it's based on very few sites. Here in the map, you can see more or less all the sites date between 1.8, that is the site of Vanisi, and 1 million years ago. So in this very long time period, we have very few evidence of Homo presence, and in most of the sites there are not human remains. And when we have human remains for such old site, those remains are just defined as Homo sp. Starting from the oldest sites and the one that is, of course, at the crossroad between Europe and Africa, we will talk about the site of Manisi. But before to get inside this topic, I just want to make you thinking about one evidence. In this table, you can see more or less how many pieces have been studied to define the cultural behavior. Of course, they are all the pieces present in the different sites. And you can see that the most of all the sites are not characterized by a lot of funding. What does it mean? It means that all considerations that I will do about the technical behavior are based on very few sites and on very small lithic assemblage. It means that it's very, very hard to really recognize convergence, divergences, equality with African, lower Paleolithic, and so on. So, of course, this is what we have, and we have to try to do with, but don't forget that all considerations are not, can change very fast once the other side will be found and more lithic will be collected. So we were saying the oldest site outside Africa, going to Europe, it's the site of Manisi, that it's a huge site found in Georgia, of course, and dated thanks to radiometric method to 1.8 more or less million years ago. Another characteristic of the oldest European site is that sometimes dating it's very complicated, and dates have a range of error that it's relatively high. The particularity of the site of Manisi, behind all the other particularity, is that this site is very well dated, as the occupation level are within two lava floor. It means that by radiometric methods can be dated very well. In Manisi, of course, the Homo was living in an open air environment and in a climate condition that was very similar to the one the Homo was used to in Africa. In this site, we have evidence of animal carcasses exploitation, probably a secondary access to the animal carcasses exploitation. And we have evidence, of course, of lithic production. But we also have something that is very important, because in Manisi, a lot of human remains have been found. It means that we have one idea about the Homo that first left Africa, even if a new species was made in Manisi, and this species is Homo georgicus. This Homo georgicus, but we will see that the same problem is present also for all the other sites, has been found only in Manisi. So for this period, we have species found just in one site. And so it's complicated by the paleoanthropological point of view, make really comparison. Another important issue is that this Homo georgicus show a very high degree of variability, and that show some features that are typical of more archaic Homo. And this have to make us thinking a lot about the variability of the Homo genus during this phase. By the point of view of the technical behavior, in Manisi, of course, it was used local raw material, like it was for the African old Duvayan, and like we will see also for all the other European sites dated around 1 million years ago. So we have basically two mine reduction sequences, one finalized to the production of flake, so one of débitage, and one finalized to the production of catinage. So we have also the façonnage. we have to think about the Pastanas because it's not always present in both sites. The exploited raw material are a lot, going from basalt to andesite, quartzite, quartz, chert, and so on. And all those raw material have been collected in the surrounding of the site and in a secondary position. This is surely the characteristics that is more accumulating this first European population. Local raw material, so the Homo was going to stay near the raw material, where the raw material was accessible, and also by the fact that this raw material is exploited more in function of the morphology than in function of the quality. So here you can have some evidences of pieces found in Manisi. Basically, we have short reduction sequences that show the utilization of an opportunistic debitage, like the one, for example, was defined by Hubert Forestier, like SSDA. And those features are really common to all sites. So if we left Manisi and we really go through Europe, we can see that the sites that are considered as attesting the oldest poplin are not so many, and they are more concentrated in Southern Europe, so Italy, France, and Spain. In this map that you can see on the left, the oldest sites are the black one, but if you are looking to the Happisburg site in England, but it's not Europe, for instance, this is very younger, more younger than the other one. So in this site, as we are saying before, we have very, very few human remains. And I put this table on the right side just to show you how information are changing in very few years. This table is coming from an article from Carbonell and colleague published in 2008. At this time, within the oldest remains, there was also the site of Ceprano in central Italy. Today, we know that Ceprano is not so old as it was announced, and it's mostly characterized by probably Homo heidelbergensis. By the other side, in the same table, you can see that there are not human remains in Barranco León, and today we have one teeth in Barranco León. So basically, if we want to deal with the first European poppling, we can deal with very few sites, and most part of them have not human remains. Of course, we will start by the older one, even if Pirro Nord is not so far in terms of chronology from the sites of Elefante, Fontenueva, and Barranco León, but as these sites is excavated by me, I will start by this. So Pirro Nord is a site located in southern Italy, as you can see in the map, near of the city of Foggia, and it's a quite strange site because it's inside an active quarry, limestone quarry, that by the instance, it's a very research limestone. For example, the Tokyo airport is made by limestone coming from this quarry. The system, the karst system of this quarry, it's quite complicated. So we have a Cretaceous limestone in discordance with Pleistocene calcarenite. Inside this Cretaceous limestone, we have a lot of course, karst fissures that was created during final Miocene. And so most part of this fissure are filled by Miocenic sediments. At that time, the Gargano Promontorio was an island, and so inside this fissure, we can find endemic fauna with evidence of insular nanism. but we will not talk about this, of course. Some of this fissure was making empty after and refilled during Pleistocene. In this fissure refilled during Pleistocene, we have the site of Pirro Nord. So basically the site of Pirro Nord, it's a karstic fissure that was containing deposits coming from the upper part, because even if we found inside a karstic fissure the site of Pirro Nord, the original position was an open air site. In the picture here, you can see the reconstruction that we have done after 10 years of work. So probably the site was located not far from the actual position of the fissure, and are atmospherical agents, basically water, that brings inside the fissure the content of the prehistorical sites. So inside this, we can find lithic industries, of course, and bones of several animals. By the way, before we start the systematic excavation, the Pirro Nord faunal assemblage was used to define the end of Villafranca. So in the fissure, we have paleontological remains coming from the human activity, where we can find cut marks, but we also have paleontological remains coming from the river, so with any connection with archaeological occupation. We can say that the site was not far from this fissure because the taphonomical characteristic of the material allow us to say that there was not transportation on long distances. By the archaeological point of view, it's a quite complicated excavation, as it's an active quarry and we are working on a vertical wall. But as we are dealing with a chronology that it's around 1.5 million years ago, it's very important to excavate it anyway. The faunal unit is composed more or less by 20 species of amphibians and reptiles, 47 species of birds, and more than 40 species of mammals. You can see that we have herbivores and carnivores, and the taphonomical analysis allow us also to underline a little bit which was the relationship between animals and Homo. Of course, we still don't have found human remains, but we have to find them in the future. So in the herbivores bones, we have found evidence cut marks, but we have found also carnivores activities. It means that probably the Pirro Nord Homo had one secondary access to carcasses. So most part of the carcasses was of the animal was killed by big carnivores such as tiger, subtip tiger, and after the Homo was collecting the things left by the tiger. Concerning the chronology, we have tried all kind of datation, but we was not very successful, because we have tried to do paleomag, but the data are not enough confident for us. We have tried to do uranium thorium dating, and ASR dating, but again, the date was too old, and so what we just have to define the chronology is biochronology. The chronology is mainly based on one animal, that is the mouse Alophaeus rufoi, and we are confident with a date placed between 1.3, 1.6 million years ago. Because also the faunal assemblage corresponds to the one of Ventamicena in Spain, that it's a paleontological site. So here we are in front of probably the oldest site of Europe, if we exclude Tunisia, of course, but it's in a different geographical position. The paleoenvironmental reconstruction is similar to the one you can see here. So it's an open environment. Once more, all both sides are characterized more or less by an open environment. And in this open environment, we have water flags that appears and disappear seasonally. At the point of view of paleolithic production, once again, we can see a lot of similarity with the African Olduvaian. So we have exploitation of local raw material, and in function of a dimension of the cobble or pebble exploited, we have the application of different reduction sequences. Basically, we have an important utilization of centripetal debitage in small pebble and an opportunistic multidirectional debitage in the bigger pebble. We have also examples of retouch, but are not so frequent for this period. And by a general point of view, once more, so we can say that we have short reduction sequences fully influenced by the raw material morphology. One important thing is that we have found in this site some recurrent morphology. Of course, for the first Olduvaian of Europe, we are used to say that there is any standardization and any kind of really predetermined plans, even if, of course, each time a Homo is striking a raw material, he knows perfectly what we will obtain. So there is a kind of predetermination, but not like we are defining, for example, for level wow for this grid. But in Pironor, we have found this kind of strange flakes that are characterized by a point opposed to a bed. And these DGT points are very recurrent. So we have applied morphometric geometrics to try to see if we can really see a standardization of this kind of products. And it seems also, thanks to the technological analysis, that effectively the small pebble was organized in order to obtain this kind of products. Okay, so the bigger here in the picture, you can see a small core. Those are the dimension of the core that are used. I don't know if you can see my pen, maybe not. Okay, those are the typical core used to obtain this kind of debordant and pointed flake. By the other side, the bigger score, like the one you can see in the bigger picture, are used with unipolar method exploiting several streaking platforms. So something that it's fully going in the SSDA variability. But of course, Pironor is not the only site with such old chronology, and we will talk also about the other sites. Of course, everybody knows the Sierra de Atapuerca site. Everybody knows that in Atapuerca, it's like the Disneyland for prehistorian, because they have everything. They have more or less continuing evolution of species. They have a lot of sites going from 1.2 million years ago to the Neolithic. So this is really an incredible evidence. Between the oldest sites in Atapuerca, the most important one, if we consider the first poppling, is Cima del Elefante, that is dated to 1.2 million years ago. And this site is very important because also show us human remains. It means that we not only have the technical information, but also the Homo information. By the other side, in the Elefante site, not so many lithic industry has been found. The conservation state is not so good to really make consideration about technology. So this is a picture of Cima dell'Elefante site. And here you can see that we have a huge stratigraphy and several levels of occupation. Most part of lithic remains and human remains are coming from the unit 9. Even in Elefante, of course, we have presence of animals' bones. And this is one side that is not in open air, but it's inside a cave. And for this reason, of course, more or less all paleontological remains are men. The lithic industry, as I was saying to you, are not very numerous and they are not well conserved, but we can make the same consideration that we have already made for Pirro Nord. So we have short reduction sequences, the utilization of local raw material, and mainly the debitage. Because we have seen that in Manisi, we have both components of lithic production, debitage and façonnage. By the other way, in these sites, Pirro and Elefante, we have more or less only production of flake, so only debitage. But in both sides, there are some quite strange instruments in raw material different from them chert that can be assimilated to façonnage products. In Pirro, it's complicated because they are in limestone, and so as we have a lot of geofacts in limestone, because the following inside the dolina can allow to accidental flaking of limestone, as we are inside a limestone environment. The same things for Elefante. So for the moment, we are not sure about the presence of façonnage reduction sequence. As I told you, in Elefante, as is in Atapuerca, they was luckier than us, and they also found human remains. But those human remains are not enough to define the species. Here in the picture, you can see just an overview of what we are talking about if we are talking about the species. So we know, of course, Homo georgicus, that has been found only in the site of Manisi. We know that it's Homo ergaster, that it's going out from Africa. And we know that the first defined species in Europe is Homo antecessor. But this Homo antecessor is defined in the site of Grandolina, and it's dated at 700,000 years ago. It means that for the first European poppling, we really don't know which species was present. Of course, talking about the out of Africa, we have different theories. We can call the Homo erectus sensolato or Homo ergaster. Today we know that the Homo heidelbergensis is probably the ancestor of Homo neanderthalensis in Europe and Homo sapiens in Africa, but this is a younger story, as Homo heidelbergensis, it's more related to the second out of Africa, so the ones who bring in Europe the Ashleyan. So by the paleoanthropological point of view, we have not so clear evidences of which species has occupied the Europe in around 1.5 million years ago. Another location fundamental to study the first European poppling is the Guadix-Baza Basin, where we near Orce in southern Spain, where we can find two sites very important that are Fontenueva and Barranco León. Both sites are open air sites again and dated to 1.2 million years ago. One human remains has been found, but it's only a teeth, and for this reason, once more, we can just call it Homo sp. By the point of view of lithic industry, once more, we are dealing with local raw material, with short reduction sequences, and with a principal finality, that is the production of flames. Also in Fontenueva, we have, in Barranco León, we have evidences of pre-touch, like we have already stressed for Pirro Nord. The sites was probably mostly finalized the exploitation of carcasses, and we have very interesting information about complete skeleton of elephants exploited by Homo, but full in veneer of coprolites of hyenas. It means that once again, like it was saying for Pirro, it's probably that several phases to access of animal carcasses are present, and probably the Homo get again a secondary access. Like I told you before, the first finality of the productions are flake, and here again we can see an opportunistic way of flakes production, and by the way we have also the presence of a centripetal debitage. When the studies about the first European poppling starts, generally the researcher was thinking that centripetal debitage was something younger, that attests a more complex production, so not present during the first European poppling. But finally today we can define without any problem that the centripetal reduction sequences are present and very common also in this period. And if we compare to Africa, we know that, for example, in the site of Cadagona, that is dated to 2.6 million years ago, we also have the presence of something like a discrete method. In Barrancoleone and Fontenueva, by the other side, we have also some evidences of façonnage on different raw materials, mostly limestone, where we can see that we have an instrument that can be classified like chopper cores. You know that today, as it's quite complicated to define if something is a chopper, so the finality was the cutting edge, or it's a core, so finality were the flake. We prefer to use the word chopper core, and probably corresponds really to the real function of the instrument, because as we need to systematize the study of lithic assemblage, we try to make categories and to make comparison and so on. But we have not to forget that probably instruments was so much more versatile than what we can imagine. Going up in time, it's important to talk about the site of Pont de Lava, that it's located in central France, and this site is dated to 1.1 million years ago. Before to describe this occupation, it's important to define that Pont de Lava, it's one of the sites with more lithic industry, so it's the one that can give us more information about the real technical behavior, because on less than 100 pieces of elefante or less than 500 in Pirro, we cannot say so much. In Pont de Lava, we have also refitting. It's an open air site, and they was using basically quartz. So all lithic industry are on quartz, collected near the site position, and we have, in this case, really both reduction sequences, the one of façonnage and the one of debitage. More than that, we have two accumulation, like you can see in the picture on the right, that probably was corresponding to something like a construction, probably a cabin, that are attested by the presence of big blocks of quartz that are not autochthonous, and so they was bring there by Homo. As I was saying you, we have a very important lithic assemblage, and this is lithic assemblage show very important concentration. One, it's mostly concentrated structure 1, and the second one is concentrated around structure 2. We have done a lot of experimentation in order to define which methods and techniques were used to produce this lithic assemblage, because this quartz is really complicated to be knapped. And we saw that most part of the lithic assemblage was produced by bipolar technique. By the other side, or the side we talked about before, are mostly based on direct percussion by hard hammer, of course. So here we can see that there was a high production, and probably, as typical of the quartz, the instrument was made for use very shortly, because the quartz lose the sharpness very, very fast. But as the production was simple, it was possible to produce flakes in continuous, flakes and catenage. So once you can see in the upper left, it's the most typical instrument in Pont de Lava. Just by one strike, we obtain 4 products. If we want to define them, the technological approach, you will see that we can recognize 2 flakes, one something like a chopper core in the one of the downside, and another one in the upper side. So this one, and the 2 flakes. But the experimentation allows us that finally they are not 2 different reduction sequences, it's just one strike on the pebble. Coming back to Italy, we have another site dated around 1 million years ago, but it's the one of Montepollo, not far from Ferrara, where I'm now. And this site, even if it's a little younger, if we compare to the other one, it's very important because it's with Vallonné, the first one that really attests the first European coupling. So at the time that Montepollo was discovered and excavated by the Professor Peretto, that it was at the University of Ferrara also. So at that time, the short chronology supported by Roebucks was really at the top of the scientific consideration. And Roebucks was considering that any kind of coupling of Europe can exist before 700,000 years ago. So more or less the date when the Acheuleans arrived in Europe. And so the migration of Homo heidelbergensis. And Piero Nord open again the questions and allow, sorry, not Piero Nord, ma Cabavedari Montepollo open again the question and allow the researcher to look for something older. Montepollo is also an urbanized site. The chemical characteristic of the ground didn't allow the conservation of fauna's remains, so we only have lithics. A lot of lithics, and more important than that, we have a lot of graffiting that really allow us to detect which were the reduction methods. The site was, the occupation was made near the sea. At that time, the sea, of course, was near. It's the Adriatic Sea. And the Homo was installing near, behind the sea, exploiting local raw material. Once again, when we are talking about local raw material, here we are talking about cobble of flint. And we know that really all the activity of trapping was made in situ because Montepollo is characterized by a huge number of refitting and a lot of quite complete refitting. So they give us information about the stratigraphy, the fact that the site didn't move before the excavation, that it was a site of production, but also of exploitation because the refitting are in most part of time complete. And they show us that some strange morphology that by a typological point of view can be considered as chopper finally are not, because we can see that the finality was really flakes. And even the user analysis show us that the only instrument used are flakes and not these chopper-like instruments. The reduction sequences was characterized again, of course, by the exploitation of local raw material and two kinds of exploitation. Unipolar with one or more streaking platforms. So if we come back to what we have seen before, something similar to the SSDA, and a centripetal exploitation, like we have seen also for Pirro Nord and Barrancoleone and Pont de Lava. If we make a difference with the other sites, in Montepollo, we have a most important presence of retouch, like some authors consider normal, because they consider that the retouch, the using of retouch, it's something like an evolution of Paleolithic industries. This, by my side, I think have still to be demonstrated. And you can see here some evidence of the flakes found in Montepollo. And the state of conservation, it's very good. So this allows also to make user analysis. And what's more, the result were that the flake of Montepollo was used to work wood and meat and skin, like always for this period when it's possible to define effectively the user analysis. So if we want to look in general what we have seen until now, we know that about 2 million years ago, Homo erectus insulato go out from Africa, and our problem are the migration route. Of course, there is a first spread to Asia, and maybe in another conference we will talk about the first opening of Asia, and after to Europe. Talking about Europe, we have different possible migration road. So we have one that it's going directly to Europe and of course Italy. The one who's including also Manisi. And there is another possibility, that it's the passage from the Gibraltar Strait. We have evidence of human presence in Algeria about 1.5 million years ago, 1.8. So some authors are considered, as we have very old sites also in southern Spain, are considering that there is a possible passage from Gibraltar, as also some faunas pass from Gibraltar. But some other authors consider that finally is not so possible, because without an active navigation, it's very complicated to cross the Gibraltar Strait. So this is still an open question, and I think it will be very complicated to answer this question. And it's also possible that all these blue migration roads are possible. So we can consider that we have contemporaneously, at the geological scale, of course, the occupation of Europe. We will be able to answer this question only if we will find even more human remains that will allow us to define a species and not also a genus. In the upper part of the slide, you can see a arrow that indicate also the occupation of Britain, that it's finally quite old. Of course, not so hot like the rest of Europe, as the climatic condition at that period was not allowing an occupation of too much northern latitude, but sites as Helsingborg show us a very old occupation. So if we want to resume our consideration, I think we have more questions at the end than at the beginning, because for such site, it's quite hard to consider the significance of convergences, divergences, equality, and differences. By a general point of view, we can consider that both sites are quite homogeneous by the behavior point of view in terms of animal carcasses exploitation, lithic production, and so on, and they are very similar to the Old Hawaiian Africa. But we have not to forget that when, for example, in Pont de Lava was using bipolar technique to broke quartz cobble in Africa, they was doing hand axes, so there was in a full Acheulean since more than 700 years. So it's possible that we have a first out of Africa that brings the Olduvaian culture, because the out of Africa is just at the band age before the passage in Africa from Olduvaian to Acheulean, and that there was no more contact between Europe and Africa until more or less 700,000 years ago when the Acheulean arrives. And so it can make sense to see both similitude with Olduvaian Africa. But the problem is that studying lithics, it's almost impossible to really define the importance of convergences. Of course, by the point of view of environment, we have a strong influence. As we have seen, all sites are located near raw material outcrops, and they are exploiting local raw material, and the environment, it's very similar, especially for the first phase coupling to the one that Homo left in Africa. But of course, culture has a huge importance, but if we are dealing only with stones in general and with very small lithic assemblage, it's complicated to really define what is a culture. We have a problem of chronology because not all of those sites are well dated, and we have a big interval. One thing that we can surely say is the first European popping is characterized by a mosaic of scenarios that show several common points, but also some local behaviors. And we have done the example of Pirro Nord, where we have this typical production of points DGT. But we don't know, we cannot know if this is related to the fact that we was exploiting a small pebble of flint that are not exploited in the other sides, or if they are related to a particular activity made in the site, and so on. So we start to have more and more information about the first European popping, but of course we have to learn more to really understand this. And I wish to thank you for the attention.
Can we trace any selection of raw material, or they use? No.
It depends what you mean. Not the one you are used to hear for more recent periods. It means that we cannot underline any selection in terms of quality of raw material, because we can see, for example, in Pont de Lava, the quartz that they are using, we have done a lot of experimentation, it's impossible to knap, and not far from Pont de Lava, you have outcrops of very good raw material. So there is not a selection in terms of quality, but there is a selection in terms of morphology. And so we can see the issues of morphologies that are very recurrent. For example, in Pirro, we have small pebble and bigger cobble, but recurrently used. Or, for example, in Pont de Lava, all the cobble that they was used have a typical flat morphology, to probably related to the fact that they need to use an anvil to knap them. So they was selecting the morphology, but really not the quality.
The quality. Okay, I understand. Thank you. And the next question, you showed the roads out of Africa. Can be possible a road directly through Sicilia to Europe from Northern Africa?
Is a very debated question. So thank you for your question, because I'm recently working in Sicily. Up to now, if we are consider the literature, the popping of Sicily, it's not before Homo sapiens, so very recent. There is a person in Sicily that it's a professor of Lyceum that is passionate in prehistory and have found a huge amount of lithic assemblage, but on surface that attest the presence of Levallois method. It means that it's Middle Paleolithic, and one of my PhD students have made a thesis on in geology on terraces, and those lithic assemblage can be related to 300,000 years ago. So this assemblage is very similar to what you are finding in African deserts, and the first reaction is they come from Africa directly, but it's more recent, so not at all for the first purpose. But if you go behind this, by the morphological point of view, you can imagine that they pass from North Africa to Sicily to Italy, but the fauna never pass. So the idea is if there was a corridor or something like this, of course, not only the Homo, but also fauna. So I'm looking for someone that tell me, yes, you can think about a passage from Africa, but nobody will never. And also the other problem is that Sicily and Italy, even if it's very short distance, was never connected, never. And so it's quite complicated. I think we can exclude for the first popping a passage from Sicily. We cannot really exclude for more recent period, but we have to demonstrate it. And for the moment is not the case.
Thank you very much.